and I would be real careful about going in that direction. And I disagree with the thing about the CDC being the public relations arm of the vaccine industry. Actually, I think it's the enforcement arm of the vaccine industry. But a lot of drug company executives find employment within the Center for Disease Control, and which is supposed to be monitoring and controlling the pharmaceutical industry. And so I don't think that that the government is, I question whether the government is primarily interested in the health of our children. I think it's mostly interested in the health of the big pharmaceutical companies. And if you go into the restroom after this, or if you've been there already, up on the wall, there's a poster that advises people to be informed about flu shots and recommend that you take flu shots. And if you inform yourself about flu shots, you might do some research beforehand and find out what's in the flu shots. Or you can request, I think you can request when you get a flu shot, the insert that comes with the vials. And it tells you, if you get pharmaceuticals, it comes with a great big sheet of really small print and what's in there and what the possible side effects could be and possible death or parallelism or whatever. You might want to know what they're injecting into your body. And parents need to know what they're injecting into their children because although the parents own their own bodies and they can control what's put in them, they're responsible for their children.
Okay. Other side. 5 minutes.
Thank you. So I'm going to address the scenario right now, and then I think during the 15 minutes that we have together, maybe we'll talk about where we differ on some of the things that you've pointed out or you've said. But I kind of want to start our conversation with something that just took place in a neighboring state. 5 children in Minnesota have been infected with the bacterial infection Hib, resulting in death of 1 and serious complications for the remaining 4. Parents chose not to vaccinate 3 of the infected children, including the child who died. Of the other 2, 1 child was too young to have the completed full series, and the other one suffered from a immune disorder. So what I want to talk about is these preventable tragedies exist all around us, all of the time. And the reason why I feel government has a role is because they are really good at protecting public health. They've done it throughout the 20th century very successfully and now into the 21st century. A couple examples of where they've been extremely successful at protecting public health is with the mandated or mandatory folic acid fortification in cereal grain products. That's been taking place since 1998. And within the first 10 years of implementation, we've seen a 35% decrease in neural tube defects in new babies. Also, in all 50 states and DC, most of you know that we have child passenger safety seat laws that fit a very specific criteria. These laws are in place to protect our children, and they've resulted in a 71% decrease in, the risk by 71% for children dying in accidents and 54% for toddlers. So it seems to me that government should be able to get involved where there are high risks and they can prevent tragedies. Vaccines are responsible, as many of you know, I don't think I need to argue this point, for substantial decline in cases of disease, hospitalizations, deaths, healthcare costs associated with vaccine preventable diseases, and contribute to improved population and public health. All of these interventions are specifically designed to save lives. They are not designed to take away civil liberties. In this particular scenario, there is an increase in the number of waivers, personal conviction waivers, amongst families who wish not to vaccinate their children. And I feel that there is a concern, and the action that Senator Jones is taking in this scenario is warranted. And that's kind of because of this story that I just read to you. There are infants who are just too young to get vaccinated, and so we need to be able to protect those infants. There are also people who are unable to receive vaccinations because they have a medical contraindication, and they also need to be protected because they cannot get the vaccine. And then there are vaccinated individuals. Unless we have herd immunity, we're not able to even protect the vaccinated individuals because vaccines are not 100% effective in 100% of the population 100% of the time. And so that herd immunity is really important. Also, the choice that one makes not to vaccinate their own children doesn't just affect that child, but affects all of the children and adults around them as well. We have the ability to eradicate some diseases and substantially decrease the health effects or the health risks and effects from other diseases. But we can only do that if we have a large amount of the population vaccinated. And so it's somewhat of a social responsibility to get vaccinated and protect the common good. This scenario would also require parents who receive a vaccination waiver for non-medical reasons to certify, they said via healthcare provider or even an online video, that they understand the benefits and the risks. And I think that this is really important. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and it's very easy to get swayed one way or the other without knowing what's the correct information. A lot of the websites that are out there now look pretty glossy. They have a very official names, and it's hard to determine which are ones that are peer-reviewed scientific websites versus ones maybe not so much. And so I think it's important that we make sure that people are getting their information from reputable sources, such as the Institute of Medicine, the CDC, and also their healthcare provider and the World Health Organization.
Thank you. Yeah, stop it.
Okay.
Okay. First of all, notice the first 3 rows are empty. I have been quarantined. Or immunized, I guess is a better way of putting it. So if you want to move up, feel free to. Well, I'm here to talk about the law in a very brief way, obviously less than 5 minutes. Should note, first of all, though, that the law is different from what necessarily should be done. The law sets the limits on what the government can do here. And if the state wants to do something different from that, as long as it doesn't violate constitutional principles, then the state can do that. So right now I'm talking about law in our discussion. I can chime in on the policy as well. I'm going to go by the different questions that were asked at the end of each study. And the first question is whether or not there's a state interest here. And I think that's a pretty straightforward answer. The answer is yeah, there's a state interest. The question is what they do with it. These are children that don't have the same kind of responsibility for themselves that adults have. They're less informed, they're less developed. There are concerns about the disease being communicated to others as well. So there's definitely state interest. There's an old Supreme Court case, 1922, but this case is still relevant to this issue, in which the court upheld a requirement, mandatory, without exemptions, in Massachusetts for smallpox. Now, let me read to you briefly from that opinion. It said that for anyone required vaccination of all persons over 21 against smallpox, and that the state had a real and substantial relation to the protection of public health and safety. In upholding the law, the court noted that the police power of the state must be held to embrace at least such reasonable regulations established directly by legislative enactment as will protect the public health and the public safety. The court added that such laws fall within the full discretion of the state, and that federal powers with respect to such laws extended only to ensure the state did not contravene the Constitution of the United States. They also said there was no absolute right to deny such treatment. Now, as an adult, you do have a constitutional right to refuse medical treatment. They cannot force that on you. The problem here is that we're dealing with children who don't have the same kind of legal status as an adult. Another issue, how onerous is the proposal of Senator Smith? I would argue, well, it was Senator Jones, I get them confused, the first one. It doesn't seem that onerous. There is an opt-out. You have to either do the online thing or consult your doctor. The devil could be in the details. How onerous is this video, for example? Is it a politician prating on for half an hour about some public issue, public health issue, which I would consider cruel and unusual punishment, perhaps? We don't know. So lots going to, when it comes to like burdens, you take abortion, you have to have informed consent before you can get an abortion in most states now. The Constitution allows that. But the question is, how onerous is that informed consent? Do they really just yell at you and disagree with you if you take a different position from the doctor? So the devil's going to be in the details. But informed consent is required for all sorts of operations. It's fairly prevalent in our society. There's a difference between soft paternalism and hardcore paternalism. Hard paternalism is when they force you to do something you don't want to do, and yet you're fully informed. Soft paternalism is when they want to make sure you're fully informed because your decision seems to go against what seems to be a reasonable position. But then if you have a reasonably effective opt-out of that, then you can opt out of that. Are there alternatives to this measure? Well, this seems, depending on the facts in the case, not too many. One could be maybe make a distinction between communicative diseases and non-communicative diseases, or diseases that spread. That we're going to compel you to do this when it comes to a disease that spreads to others, maybe not for ones that just affect you. But Smith's position is worthy of consideration, and this ties into the burden of proof issue as well. So to start with, if you have a sufficient liberty claim, this is a parent making the claim on behalf of the child, then that has constitutional weight, and the court has to weigh that in the balance. But once you have what is seen as a reasonable and sufficiently necessary state law here, the burden of proof should shift over to the person who wants the exemption. And as long as they're the ones who want to sort of change the status quo here, and law usually makes them have to kind of make a case. And I think given what we see here, absent the politician parading on for 30 minutes, this seems like a fairly non-onerous kind of procedure. So the major legal issue here is, the state power to regulate health, if they show sufficient reason to do so, and if the infringement upon liberty is not more than is necessary to achieve that particular end. So it's a question of how you strike the balance. And in my view, I'm pretty sure courts would uphold this because you have that exemption. And the question is, how onerous is that exemption to show?
Thank you for your conversation. At this point, we'd like to open the conversation, and you folks are at liberty to do this however way you feel most comfortable. But you're on tape, remember that.
I can't take my shoe off and pound it on the table.
I think one of the important things said was that the scenario in no way limits the parent's ability to get a waiver. That is still an option. That's not taken off the table. It's just coupling the education with the waiver. This was done in Washington State, and within the first 11 months of implementation, they saw the opt-out rate drop by 25%. And so that ability to couple the education with the waiver actually increased immunization rates. So there is some evidence that educating people further about the risks and benefits from what we consider reliable critical sources does have a benefit.
Let me add another quick issue here. In Wisconsin law, as I read it online before the meeting, if a child or parents refuse to be immunized and it's a communicable disease and 98% of the student body or less has been immunized, then that student can be expelled from school in the name of trying to protect the other children. And you do have in health law, quarantines where you can't even leave your home if indeed there's a public health emergency. There's emergency exceptions to virtually everything in the Constitution, depending on where is that line drawn. And so these measures here aren't nearly as onerous as those two things.
98% of the student population is immunized?
If it's less than 98% immunized, then that could mean that it could spread.
Okay.
And now I think recently it's gone up to 99%.
How could it spread to the 98% if they've been immunized?
Look, it spread to those who aren't.
There's a lot of science behind this. This is not just based on someone's desire to, discriminate against people who choose not to be vaccinated. It's for each disease, there's a level of coverage that you need to achieve in order to basically stop transmission in the population, because there are just so many people. If most of the people in the population are not susceptible, the disease won't spread even to the people who are susceptible. They're essentially protected because they're surrounded by other people who are vaccinated. That's called herd immunity. And that varies for the different diseases. It turns out for measles, you need to have about 95% coverage because measles is extremely contagious. It spreads like wildfire. And so in order to to protect those people who can't get the vaccine or they have immune system problems or something like that, you have to have a very high level of coverage. So the 98% wasn't just picked out of a hat, I'm pretty sure, even though I don't know exactly how it was decided, but it fits very well with sort of what we know about measles. And it varies for different diseases, and smallpox is another example. Smallpox has been eradicated. People in the room here have never seen a case of smallpox, but it killed millions of people. And the vaccine was first brought out in the 1950s, and mandatory vaccination occurred, in much of the world. And if it hadn't, that disease wouldn't have been eradicated. Now, having said that, I'm not, I think the scenario was very reasonable that people did have the opportunity to opt out. You had the soft paternalism, as you mentioned, and vaccines are the case where most people who choose not to be vaccinated will probably be fine, but still there is a risk, and people die from measles. 1 in 1,000 kids dies from measles. 40% of kids with measles end up in the hospital. It's not a trivial thing. And so if you're putting your community at risk by not being vaccinated, that's not good.
Okay.
Aren't we vaccinated for measles? So then how
Right.
come 40% of us get them?
No, well, but there are pockets. Like, for example, there was a report just last week of a church congregation, a huge congregation at one of these mega churches in Texas, where the pastor was preaching against vaccines and concerned about vaccines and autism, which isn't true. That's a scientific question. It's not true.
Right.
But much of the congregation didn't get vaccinated as a result. Well, someone traveled to a foreign country, came back with measles, and then they had a huge outbreak in this congregation. And now the pastor is backpedaling and saying, well, okay, everybody should get vaccinated. But that's how it can happen. You're right, in the overall population.
That doesn't add up to 40% of the population. I misunderstood you.
No, I
Maybe
meant
I
40%
misunderstood
of
you.
kids with measles end up being hospitalized.
Oh, okay.
That's what I
Okay.
meant to say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I ask you guys a question sort of in relation to yours too? That, as libertarians, you want real good proof, right, that this is necessary. You're not saying it shouldn't be done per se. You just want that hurdle to be pretty high, right?
Well,
because of the liberty concern.
Well, I think that this is, we're talking about a school issue, and the school should be educating and informing parents about the risks of the disease and also the risks of the vaccine so that they can decide. I don't think they should be taking a shortcut and mandating it and forcing it on them.
Yeah. It's like the seatbelt law. I think you're goofy in the head if you don't wear your seatbelt. Okay, there's something fundamentally wrong with you. Okay? But
I don't wear one.
there you go. My point is proved. But you see, they passed this law to save lives, and again, who's against saving lives? How are you going to come out? And when you say, well, it's for the children, all argument stops. You can't.
I agree with
You're done in the water because you've already changed the tone of the debate to, oh, this heartless bastard.
So your concern is partly the slippery slope.
It is a slippery slope. Where does it stop?
A little bit here, a little bit there, and before
You bet.
you know it.
And again, libertarians are about personal responsibility. I'm responsible for myself and my children. I'm responsible for my parents, and I'll probably be responsible for my grandchildren. And it's when the state comes in and starts taking this responsibility, soft or hard paternalism, however you put it, I don't think it's a magic number, a magic percentage. And again, I got my kids immunized, so I'm not really arguing with you. I think we have can you sue somebody if your kid gets sick and they didn't get immunized?
Well, let's
Can you go that route?
You can sue the parents so that.
Can you sue the parents of
Christian
that
Science
kid?
cases, they have.
Yeah,
to.
and we also have lots of issues with is the government really interested in our health and our well-being? Is marijuana legal or illegal?
Yeah, medical marijuana is illegal in Wisconsin.
And what's the
Raw
data
milk?
on that? It really helps people, but it's illegal. So they're picking and choosing what they're doing. You see where we're coming from?
Absolutely.
I think there's a key difference here, and the difference is I think you can choose to be vaccinated or not vaccinated. You can choose to get medical care or not medical care. For yourself, you can choose to do whatever you want. If it only affects you, that's fine. It's a lot different when it affects a child. A child can't make an informed decision. So let's take a little more extreme example. Let's say your religion says that blood transfusion should never be given under any circumstance. Your child is in an accident and is going to bleed out if he doesn't get a blood transfusion. You say, I don't believe in that. It's against my religion. Is it your right to let your child die? Now, you might say yes. I would say, no, you can choose to endanger your own life, but for any reason, even a religious reason, you can't choose to endanger your child's life. Because your child doesn't get to make that decision. So that would be our...
But you don't own your child, right? I mean, libertarian would be the last person to say that you own your child.
No, but you're responsible for that child. And, again, I lack the moral certainty of your position. Okay, I might be wrong. And I'm not willing, I'm going to let these people let their conscience be their guide, and I'm not going to tell them what to think, how to think, and when to think it.
Well, let me push very quickly the legal point again that the distinction between law and policy. Under the Constitution, especially because we're talking about states here, which have the domain of police power, the Constitution has consistently, based on court rulings, which maybe you'll disagree with, given the states tremendous powers in the area of public health. All right. Now that doesn't mean they should go there.